start by defining sublime?
Everyday life is actually sublime. We're just closed to it. We're just walking around asleep. We're sleepwalking.
Can a person go their entire life without experiencing the sublime is all around them?
It's constantly within us. If you don't get it, the experience, you turn to alcohol or you turn to addiction, which kind of fake the sublime.
I'm curious, in the ancient world, have you seen a difference in leaders, the ones that consumed or experienced the sublime?
We now know that almost every ancient culture in some way used mind-altering plants. They discovered this cup from ancient Egypt that contained some kind of hallucinogenic herb.
Can the dark moments of childhood and adversity that we experience in childhood also be considered sublime?
My near-death experience, I was unconscious for I don't know how long. I was sunk into that darkness and it was sort of a sense of death. It's almost painful and pleasurable at the same time. That is what the sublime is.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience maybe with psychedelics throughout your life?
I went to Berkeley. When I was there, drugs was the big thing. So we got into smoking pot and smoking like really hardcore stuff, the kind of stuff that would make you trip. Our favorite drug of the time was peyote. Peyote is a hard drug to obtain now because mostly it's synthesized into mescaline. It was so weird, so wonderful. Visions, you felt godlike.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about your experience, stroke you had, and your own relationship with death.
I was driving my car, my wife was in the passenger seat, and she saw the side of my face was just going some weird contortion. She got very frightened. She called 911 and then I'm out. I'm unconscious. I'm in a coma.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today.
Thanks for having me, Milan. My pleasure.
You recently caught my attention when I was watching an episode where you mentioned an altered state of consciousness that you experienced once in your life. And so immediately I became excited by the idea of getting the opportunity to talk to you about that.
Okay.
In interviews about your upcoming book, you've discussed encounters with the sublime. I'm curious if you could first start by defining sublime for me.
Well, the definition that I use in the book, because it's a word that has been used for centuries, has many different meanings. I mean, people say that a hamburger is sublime. I'm not talking in that sense. So I like to picture it like a circle, okay? So to be a human being, we all live inside of a circle, and that circle comprises all of the conventions, the codes, the beliefs, the ideas that are culturally acceptable at a time. Now, if you go back to ancient Egypt, those codes and conventions are different from now, but there was still a circle because that's how humans operate. We try to create order out of the chaos of the universe, right? The sublime is everything that lies just outside of that circle, things we're not supposed to necessarily experience, ideas that we're not supposed to necessarily have, behavior that's maybe a little bit transgressive or taboo, things that go beyond what we're supposed to think, do, and behave like. And so each chapter deals with something just outside that circle. The first chapter is about the cosmos and our relationship to infinity and eternity, which is a very strange idea that we're conscious of this. Then there's life itself and our relationship to the fact that of evolution and biology and how weird it is to even be alive and to be here talking to you. And then, I have ancient religion is one, childhood is another, because childhood was a very sublime moment in our lives. I have a chapter about the brain. Just being conscious of consciousness is already a sublime experience. Our relationship to animals. Love is a chapter, and how love can take us outside of our ego, which is something that's beyond that limit. So, to just back up a second, the word sublime means from the Latin, up to the threshold of a door. And the way I like to imagine it in my mind is, if you can imagine in each of those areas around the circle opening up, there's like a door opening up to something beyond what we're supposed to do or think. And you're peering through that door. And the ultimate door, which is the last chapter of the book, is death itself. Because that's the ultimate mystery. And some of us, in fact all of us, have had little inklings of what death is like. I myself had a near-death experience a few years ago. So if you can imagine the circle that you're normally inside and you feel kind of tight and constrained by all the conventions in our world, and people are incredibly tight right now with all the political correctness and stuff. They're so wound up. You get to go and you voyage up to the limit of that circle, you open the door and you peer through, those are sublime experiences.
And can you speak to a moment maybe in early childhood that you may have had or that most people may experience that you could say is like a clear example of that sublime experience?
So you ask me about childhood. Well, in this book, I want people to get out of the idea that the sublime is some insanely incredible experience. It's actually around us in everyday life, right? Everyday life is actually sublime. We're just close to it. We're just walking around asleep. We're sleepwalking. Okay, so childhood is sublime just by its very nature, and everybody had these experiences in childhood, but they've repressed them because the world was so fresh and new and everything looked different and exciting. So for me personally, it's not like some grand consciousness moment in childhood. It was more like everyday things. So I grew up in a neighborhood here in Los Angeles called Baldwin Hills, and we lived just on the side of this hill. And I can remember going up in this hill with my father, and there were these enormous power generators on the hill, and they seemed like kind of monsters to me, something out of science fiction. And just going up that hill was an experience of like something immense and vast. And then I remember at my elementary school, there was this really large parking lot. And so the images in my mind from childhood of sublime are of these large, vast spaces, open spaces, which were like a childhood intimation of eternity, of infinity. And my father, who was very much into like jets and planes, because he fixed airplanes during the war, he did build these little kind of rockets. And we would go to this immense parking lot, which is not immense at all since I've been back there. As a child, it seemed immense. And we would launch this rocket into the sky, and I'd go, whoa. And then the same experience was flying kites, having a kite way up in the sky, give you that kind of thrill, that sense of infinity, which for a child children are very aware of it when they look at like the night sky. Something is endless. How can something be endless? And it gives you a kind of a chill and also a little bit of terror, because something that's endless is almost like death itself, sort of thing. So there are little moments of like encounters with space and large spaces and darkness that are embedded in my mind from my very early childhood of what I would call the sublime. I'm sure there are others, but those are what stand out right now.
You mentioned darkness as well. Can the dark moments of childhood and can that adversity that we experience in childhood also be considered sublime?
Well, I mean darkness in the sense of shadows and empty space, which are kind of a feeling of death, a sense of death itself. Like, I had the dream the other night. I guess it's almost like a nightmare in which I dreamt that essentially the world had ended. And there was something where all of us are together, every human being on the planet, and suddenly there's a flash and everything goes dark and we all experience that darkness at once, right? That sense of just being blanketed in the dark is sublime and is terrifying at the same time. And I think my oldest childhood memory is I was with my oldest friend, a kid named Ricky Wise, but I don't know why I remember his name. And we were by ourselves, and we were walking around some old, like, apartment building, and in the shadows and the darkness, it's like my earliest childhood memory. I must have been like 4 years old. But for some reason, the darkness of that, the shadow of this building stuck in my mind, because I think vast dark spaces have a very profound effect on the brain. As far as dark, bad experiences in life, there is a chapter on, which is my next chapter, which is called the dynamical sublime, which is part of the original philosophy that Immanuel Kant wrote about the sublime, which is the sense of, so the sublime originates in the feeling that we're so small as human beings, as a single individual in this vast cosmos. That's kind of the infinity aspect of it. We're so small, We're swallowed up in this endless time, endless space. The dynamical sublime are the moments where your willpower kicks in and you overcome such incredible odds that you're almost like godlike, and you have this feeling like, my willpower isn't, I'm not so small after all. And so overcoming tremendous odds can be sublime. I don't mean in the sense of, wow, I triumphed over it. It's the sense almost of your consciousness expanding and you don't feel so small anymore. I can't really call about my own childhood because I had a pretty easy, good childhood. I mean, my parents, I was pretty much unsupervised, but I didn't really have any horrible experiences. My near-death experience was probably the closest thing I've ever come to it, where I was unconscious for I don't know how long. I was sunk into that darkness that we're talking about in a kind of a coma, and it was sort of a sense of death, and I can talk about that later if you want.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that. Can a person go their entire life without experiencing this, like sublime, or becoming, not experiencing it, but not being aware that the sublime is all around them? And
well, I think everyone has had moments of it, particularly in childhood. And I think it's a hunger that's in human beings that goes back thousands of years, and in the book I discuss the primitive origins of that feeling. So it's within all of us. It's constantly within us. And if you don't get it, the experience, you reach for what I call the false sublime. You want that experience, but you're not able to get it because of the culture you live in, your own circumstances. So you turn to alcohol, or you turn to addictions. You do a lot of online porn, or you watch Marvel movies, which kind of fake the sublime, but aren't really it. Because the thing about the sublime is, you're active, your mind is active in that moment. You are creating that experience. The false sublime is passive. I'm just drinking, I'm just watching movies, I'm being fed all of these images. That's the false sublime. And we have too much passivity in our culture. So the reason I'm writing the book is, our minds are shrinking into our phones. We're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Our thoughts are getting smaller, narrower, and more banal. At the same time that science is exploding around us with all sorts of intimations of something much greater than ourselves. So it's this kind of paradox that as our minds are shrinking, our science and our knowledge is expanding. And so, to answer your question, we live in a culture that makes the sublime experience harder to access at the same time that it's actually more available. We just have it harder to reach because our minds are shrinking to the size of our technology.
Do you have a moment where you can recall becoming hyper-aware? Like, was it early in your life? Was it the moment you had the stroke that you became hyper-aware of the sublime?
No, it was more of an intellectual thing. You see, what I'm trying to express in the book is it's not an intellectual concept people write about. It's a visceral, emotional experience that you have, right? But my first connection to it was totally intellectual. I read a book in the 90s about the sublime because I read a lot of theory and things that excite me like that. And I go, wow, what an interesting concept. It just caught my attention. And it changed how I looked at a lot of things. So I remember one of the ideas in this book, which is an idea in my new book. What I'm trying to express in the book is it's not an intellectual concept people write about. It's a visceral, emotional experience that you have, right? But my first connection to it was totally intellectual. I read a book in the 90s about the sublime because I read a lot of theory and things that excite me like that. And I go, wow, what an interesting concept. It just caught my attention. And it changed how I looked at a lot of things. So I remember one of the ideas in this book, which is an idea in my new book, is a feeling of excess, of too much. There's too much, I can't handle it all. It overwhelms my sense, my ability to perceive, my ability to kind of understand and comprehend what's going on. That's a sublime experience, right? The excess of life, the excess of images. That captured I don't know, something about that seems so exciting to me. My whole life, I want ideas that I've never thought of before. So some people think going to Tibet is the greatest experience of their lives, traveling or something. For me, a new idea is like traveling to Tibet. Never thought of that before. It sets my mind whirling. And this idea that the feeling of too much is like the sublime. And I believe the writer, or maybe I'm just making it up, compared it, oddly enough, to an orgasm. And in French, orgasm, the expression in French for an orgasm is le petit mort, the little death. And when you have an orgasm, it's pleasurable, obviously, but it's almost too much. It's almost painful and pleasurable at the same time. That is what the sublime is. It's this pain, there's an element of pain, like, wow, the sky is infinite, I'm going to die, life is so short. But the sense that I could know about what's infinite is also deeply pleasurable. So, God, I'm going around I feel like a moth circling around your question. I haven't quite got to it, but did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
So I'm curious, does every moment where a person is aware of the sublime experience, is there some sort of change in your brain chemistry happening? Is there some sort of altered state of consciousness happening every time, whether it's experienced from an orgasm or through some sort of physical strain, hiking to the top of something, or taking a substance,
Well, I mean, there's various things that you're bringing up. First of all, the neuroscience people have been studying what they call states of awe. And they do detect certain processes going on in the brain that are different. I've read about it. I can't really speak intelligently about that. But there is something going on in the brain. But the idea of altering consciousness is a little bit, to me, of a misnomer. Our consciousness is constantly altering. In our environment, in our day-to-day life, everything is constantly shifting. What we do when we fall asleep, we're entering an altered state of consciousness. Okay? So, if you want to talk about the capital A altered state of consciousness, a larger one, something else is going on. And the way I like to talk about it is not altered state of consciousness, but an expansion of consciousness. Okay? So normally, our consciousness is always in the process of narrowing as we get older. We're not so young anymore. Our ideas get static. We want things to be ordered. We need order. We need stability. We need comfort. And our consciousness is continually contracting in that. With these experiences, it's like, whoa, it's opening up. It's expanding, right? It's taking in more. And the human brain is a remarkably sensitive instrument. Theoretically, and Aldous Huxley talks about this, we should be able to take in everything. Our consciousness has that possibility, right? So the expansion of consciousness is those doors of perception are opening up. And we're seeing and we're sensing more. It's not just our ideas, but our senses are opening as well. So I like to talk of the sublime more in the sense of an expansionness of consciousness as opposed to an alteration, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Recently, I've been focused on how psychedelics play a role in that and the role that they could play therapeutically for people in helping expand consciousness from the neuroplasticity standpoint, which I think helps, as you said, like as people are getting older and we get more rigid and more narrow in our focus. Can you talk a little bit about your experience maybe with psychedelics throughout your life and into now?
Well, I'm an older person, so let's get that out of the way. I went to Berkeley my first 2 years of college in like 1974, 75. So the trail end of the hippie generation, things were kind of dying out. It's kind of a depressing time, to be honest. But at Berkeley, when I was there, drugs was the big thing. And so we got into smoking pot and smoking like really hardcore stuff, the kind of stuff that would make you trip, like Thai stick, like hash. We would eat hashish. I don't know if you've ever eaten hashish. It is one of the strangest, most incredible experiences you'll have, right? And There's the expression of those, are you Persian?
Yes.
Okay, so the assassins, you know about the assassins, the old man in the mountain, right from the 12th century?
No, I actually.
Well, it was a branch of Islam where they would go around, they would be killing various leaders for power and for various reasons. I'm not going to go all into that. But the word assassins comes from the word hashish, because they were eating hashish, and it would make them go into the state where they could go out and kill people. So our word assassin literally comes from the word hashish. So he was eating hashish. And then I can remember the first time we were taking the BART subway into San Francisco, and for my first time to a Japanese restaurant, and it started kicking in, and I go, whoa, this is really interesting. Something's going on here. It was kind of subtle, but then it wasn't so subtle. And I think we went to some rock concert or something afterwards. So it was such an interesting experience to have, like, suddenly everything sort of shift on me that I kind of came hooked on it. And our favorite drug of the time was peyote, because that was sort of the fashion then. Peyote is a hard drug to obtain now because mostly it's synthesized into mescaline. But peyote are these, what are they called, buttons that grow on cactus. They look like a very large button, and they have all these white hairs on them, which are poisonous. And, you know, obviously Native Americans and in Mexico, it's part of their religion, eating peyote. So we got some because they were available. We had a dealer in like Santa Cruz, and you'd get like a bag full of these buttons. You had to pick all of the white hairs off of them because they were poisonous. And eating it kind of makes you throw up. You can't taste it. It's so vile. So you have to cut it up into small pieces and put it into a shake or put it into a peanut butter sandwich or something to disguise it. And even when you eat it, you probably will throw up because it's upsetting to the stomach. And you would have like 4 buttons, maybe 3 or 4 buttons a person. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that. It was the most amazing trip of them all. It was so weird, so wonderful. Visions, you felt godlike. It was beyond. I've had mushrooms and I've had obviously LSD. It's beyond all of those. It was so powerful and so immense. I had my most enlightened moments on that. I can remember we went to this city called Mendocino on the coast of California, north of San Francisco, beautiful city. And I was walking with my friend Cliff along the beach, and I was taking all of the seaweed and wrapping it around myself like I was Poseidon, you know, the Greek god. And it was like a pagan experience of what history was like thousands of years ago. And you have to understand, Milan, that my major in college, as I was nearing the end of my time in Berkeley, because I transferred to the University of Wisconsin, was classics. So I was at the time reading ancient Greek. That was the language I was studying. So I was like traveling back in time. And then we would go to rock concerts and stuff, tripping on it. But peyote was the one that sticks out in my mind as the most intense experience of them all.
Were there ever any so-called bad trips or experiences in the Sublime that you weren't ready for at the time, or that took you years to understand, or anything like that?
No, I've had one bad trip where a couple years later I was living in Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, for a job. And I went to a party, and they were having brownies with pot in them. I had too many of them, and I got totally paranoid, and I thought people were trying to kill me. And it was a very unpleasant experience. It's the only bad trip I've had. I don't know, and with the people that we did it with in our little group in Berkeley, I can't remember anybody having a bad trip on peyote. So, I don't know. I never really had those moments. I guess I'm very lucky because I know it's a possibility. You know, back then, talking like I'm 1,000 years old, but back then, the drugs were purer than they are now. So the LSD wasn't cut with so many things. We even had somebody in our dorm who could make LSD. He was a chemistry student. He could make it. The pure stuff. That was insane. But even the stuff that you bought, window pane, that's mostly window pane that we used. It was so much purer than it is now. It wasn't cut with anything. The peyote was pure. So now if you get mescaline, it's usually cut with some amphetamine to speed you up. That's where you get the bad trips. So our drugs, God, I don't know how this is going to sound, but they were so much purer and more natural and real than people are now. So maybe that's why we didn't have any bad trips.
How important do you think those experiences were now to your life? Like, had you not experienced those, would you care about the sublime? Would you?
I don't think so. I think it changed me in some fundamental way. So after I left Berkeley, I did psychedelics a few more times, but not so much. So it kind of tapered off. But I think it changes something in you in that you become aware of a different way of perceiving reality. And that's a very, very powerful thing to experience. So there's a psychologist named Abraham Maslow. He calls the sublime experience, he calls it a peak experience in life, right? Where you feel ecstatic, you feel blissful. He says if you have one of those moments in your life, it's transformative because you never forget about it. And you're always either yearning to have it back or in some way bringing it back, manufacturing it in some way. So those moments were kind of like peak experiences that you never forget. And it makes you aware as you're going around your day-to-day boring, banal life and understand throughout my 20s and 30s before I wrote my books, I had some of the worst, most banal jobs you can imagine, right? And I suffered in them. So I traveled through Europe. I worked in a hotel in Paris. That was pretty exciting, actually. So my time in Europe was I should shut up. That was pretty exciting. I taught English in Spain. I was a tour guide in Dublin. I was on the island of Crete. I had run out of money, so I did construction work and dishwashing. In London, I had a terrible job working in television. My worst jobs were journalism in New York and Hollywood jobs, because I kind of hate Hollywood. I don't need to go into that, but I really hate Hollywood. And so, really soul-sucking jobs, And so, I know what it means to suffer, because I suffered. I had no success until I was 39, 40. And I know that feeling of banality kind of sucking your soul out of you. And so I'd always have those peak moments sticking out of my mind like, there's something else, Robert. You got to go back. You got to find a way back to it. So to answer your question, yeah, those psychedelic, those moments of tripping had a lasting effect on me.
Yeah. Robert, you mentioned the ancient Persians consuming hashish and using that as a method to go off and kind of...
Well, I don't know if it was Persians. It was a branch of Islam called the Ismailis. And I think they were in Iran in like the 11th century. But I know Persian is a specific ethnicity, so I don't know if they were Persians.
Okay,
Can't say for sure, but anyway.
Well, I'm curious, in the ancient world that you've studied, have you seen a difference in leaders that you can point to and say the ones that consumed or experienced the sublime through the consumption of any sort of substance made them more powerful or better leaders or not? Is there any?
I don't know about leaders because the consumption of hallucinogens is a spiritual matter. So it's not really allied with governing or politics. I can't say that for sure for every culture. But we now know that almost every ancient culture in some way used mind-altering plants, right? It's pretty widespread. And, I just read the other day that they discovered this cup from ancient Egypt that contained some kind of hallucinogenic herb. They didn't know that the Egyptians did that. So I think it's becoming clear that it's spread throughout all the ancient world. But it was very, very much allied with a spiritual experience. And I describe that in the book in a particular chapter. We've come so far away from that world, the ancient world and the spiritual world that people used to believe in, that it's very, very hard for us to understand what their spiritual experience was like, and then to understand how hallucinogens might have entered into the picture. But because we're kind of raised in a more rational culture, which is very much stemming from monotheism, and in these religions there was polytheism, which there were many different gods representing many different forces. And they were forces in nature. And so a religious experience was to be possessed by one of these forces, whether it was love and Aphrodite and sex, whether it was warfare, whether it was, I don't know, you can name any one of them. So the feeling that when you took this hallucinogen, or you had one of these rituals, like an initiation ritual in which a lot of hallucinogens were involved, but not necessarily, where you felt they would literally put you into a near-death-like experience. You felt that something was possessing your body and your mind and your spirit, and that something else was something spiritual, it was part of the cosmos, right? So it's a very different thing than how we imagine it. It wasn't for entertainment. It wasn't for fun. It wasn't for going to a rave and, just zoning out or something. It was to get closer to the gods that you believed in, right? And so I think, I'm not pagan. That would be ridiculous for me to say that because I've grown up in this culture. But I think there's a part of us that still feels that kind of hankering, that kind of yearning for something like that. And so the feeling of having this kind of expanded consciousness is a sense of almost being possessed by something in nature, and you feel a kind of unitary consciousness. So I think that ancient pagan way of relating to life, which involved these mind expansion hallucinogens, is still something we all yearn for, and it's still something some of us experience in life.
Mm. And you seem a little critical of modern society and this overusage of technology and such. Do you think there's that modern day religion and this monotheist culture is actually a detriment to people, and that somehow we need to move back to some form of some sort of integrated spirituality throughout society?
Well, I'm not completely against it. It'd be hypocritical. I use my smartphone, I use technology in my research, and it's embedded in our daily life. So it would be ridiculous for me to pretend that I'm somehow cut off from that, or that I'm really somehow different, superior to everyone else. I know the addiction, I know what it does to people, I feel it in my body and in my mind. I just think that it's gone too far, and we're losing a sense of what it means to be a human being, and what it means to feel connected to the world around us. I don't just mean to like God or anything. I just mean to be connected to your environment, to go around and feel like you're actually looking at the world and not inside your own thoughts. I do a lot of deep meditation every morning, 40 minutes every morning. And it's a form of meditation where you're trying to stop thinking, stop all the thinking going on. And then when you do that, everything looks differently. And so the other day I was on a bike ride. I have a special bike that I use for my broken body, but I go up into Griffith Park, and I'm cutting off my thinking, and for just a few minutes, everything looks differently. Like I'm looking at the trees and the vegetation, and I'm not looking at them as if they're words, tree and vegetation. I'm looking at them, the sun shining on the leaves. It's like they're new, they're fresh. This is how a child must have seen it, right? Mm. And so that's something we've lost. We don't look at the world. We're disconnected from things. We're sleepwalking. And I don't mean it in a superior sense. I feel it too. We need to ground ourselves in something more like that. You could call it whatever you want. You could call it, we need to become more spiritual. However it is, I'm not going to put the word on it. But we need to feel more connected to our environment, to our world. Our senses are becoming dulled because we're so virtual, right? In the virtual world, there's no smell. Mm. Smell has a very important part to play for the human being. So that's what a lot of drugs do to you. You're like, suddenly your senses just open up. right? That comes from that poem of William Blake. If the doors of perception could be cleansed, we would all perceive eternity. It's the doors of perception, our senses, that have been closed. So it's not just spirituality, it's getting more in touch with our bodies and our senses that is wrong, that has kind of gotten off track in our culture. And that I'm critical of, and that I think is very dangerous.
How do you suggest people balance the need to kind of be on technology, use it because it's a necessary part of their daily lives, their work, and maintaining also that curiosity, that sense of searching for sublime experiences, looking at the world in that way?
Well, the main thing will be reading my book when I finally finish the damn thing, because every chapter has exercises in there for how to make the book practical, how to make the ideas practical, how to go about your everyday life and be experiencing this. I don't want it to be just this intellectual book that you read. I want it to change how you look at things. But you can't give up the technology. I've not been able to. I'm obviously use it as much as anybody. But you have to carve out other moments in your life, right? So for me, it's the meditation in the morning. No, I am such a fascist. Nobody can interrupt me. No sounds. My wife has to go in the other room. The cat has to go in the other room. By myself, get out of me. No world anywhere, right? Then when I take my bike ride, I used to take walks. I don't have my headphones. I don't have my phone with me. I'm out in the world. You have to cut yourself off from it at certain moments of the day. You have to give yourself an hour or 2 hours a day where you're not interacting with this shit. You're on your own, right? And I like to think of it as a ritual. So because I have my background in ancient religions, I'm someone who really kind of thinks rituals are sort of a very pleasant thing to have in your life. So my meditation is a ritual. Going out in nature in some form is a ritual. So you're taking these, say, 2 hours a day, no phone. And I go up into the mountains here in Griffith Park on my silly little bicycle. It's a trike. It's a recumbent bike, right? But it's insane exercise, I can tell you. Anyway, there are people way up in the hills, no cars or anything, and they're still got their fucking phone and they're like in there, like walking like this in the middle of nature. And I want to slap them in the face and get away. You're not looking at anything. So put your goddamn phone away. Take a walk. I used to swim every day before my stroke, and there would be people who had headphones when they were swimming. Come on, people.
I don't know that it's going to get much better, though. I mean, I look at the emerging technology that's coming, and I think that, the most intense of it being like Neuralink, right? Eventually having computers that are integrated with your brain.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
I'm glad I'm going to die before all that happens.
Well, on the one side, you could look at that and say, well, technology like that will, give someone who's had a stroke the ability to have full function in their legs back. Right?
True.
And then on the other hand, it's, okay, well, now this person is never disconnected. If ever they want music, they just think of it and it turns on. And
yeah, that's bad.
So, yeah, I suppose that might be bad. But I don't know.
Suppose. What could be possibly good at that? You see, the more powerful technology becomes, the weaker we become. The weaker our willpower becomes, right? You used to... So, when I was a kid growing up, I know I'm sounding like one of those grandfathers in TV shows, but I didn't have any technology. I had nothing. I had to invent the games to play for. And so I invented all kinds of really weird games, a lot of having to do with sports and warfare, which was sort of my passions when I was a kid. But your imagination takes up, your willpower gets engaged when you have nothing to entertain you, right? So in the 19th century, you had no television, you had no recordings, you had nothing. You didn't have radio, you didn't have a telephone. I'm talking about early 19th century. So, but you'd be bored. So what did you do? You would go out, you would socialize, you'd go to salons, you would meet people, you learn how to play musical instruments because that's the only way you could hear music. Your willpower became engaged and you became more of a human being. You created things. Our technology is going to get so strong that people won't have the willpower, the strength to create anything. If ChatGPT, or whatever the thing it's called, can suddenly create an image for you, why bother to learn how to paint? Right? If you can compose a piece of music by ding, why learn how to compose? And when in the process you're losing something very, very valuable and very human.
But do you not see it as a normal part of evolution of technology? Like, all of a sudden now we know how to, when we're able to type, then it's less important to be able to write in cursive, right? And that's just it's a shift and an improvement which raises the bar of the quality of output almost. If anyone can generate an image now, then the quality of that image better be really great when you're trying to sell it for art.
I'm sorry, Milan, I don't really agree because, our literature hasn't gotten better because people know how to type on a computer. Because you can virtually do something really quick and write a novel in a month doesn't mean you're better than Charles Dickens or Fyodor Dostoevsky. I don't think so. Or Vladimir Nabokov, one of my favorite writers. Because of my stroke, I can't type. I was a pretty damn fast typist before then. I have to handwrite everything, right? And I used to handwrite a lot, but what I've discovered was, first of all, I developed a fetish for fountain pens. And I got fountain pens with all different colored inks. And I'm writing on a pad of paper, and I'm scratching with my hand. It's this kind of sensual thing with the writing, and I have all different colors going on. It's kind of very pleasurable. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should go back to that at all, but I debate with you this idea that it makes people better or smarter at it. I don't think because your AI-generated painting has to be really good to sell an art gallery. I think it's going to make you better than Da Vinci. I think it's going to make you better than Pablo Picasso, to argue with you. So it's not making us better just because of the technology. And what is going to happen, I believe, or my hope or my faith is, we're not going to get rid of the technology. It serves a function. It's embedded in our daily lives. But a point is going to be reached where young people, because it has to come from young people, it can't come from people in my generation, we're too old, we're too rigid. Young people are going to grow up in a world, they're 18, they're 19, they're going to be disgusted by all of this. Their bodies are so full of energy, they want to have things that are more physical, that are more sensual, and they rebel. And there will be the equivalent of the 1960s, or like a hippie-like rebellion of going back to things that were more kind of real to them. And it'll happen and it'll incorporate technology, but it'll be on a higher level where it's more human, it's more sensual, it's more involved with our senses, it's more involved with our bodies. It's got that kind of ancient feel to it. Because I don't think we can go on this long eventually where people are going to feel, it's already happening, where people are feeling so alienated from themselves that they're craving something else. A generation will emerge where that will become a revolution. I'll be dead, but I'll be celebrating it from my grave.
Do you feel like religion will play a part in that, or that it already might be playing a part in it, that people don't relate to religion anymore, and that straying from spirituality of any kind is enabling people to go too far into the route of allowing technology and distractions and constant flooding of media to kind of take over from the otherwise natural desire to be quite human and to do human things?
Yeah, I don't know what form it would take, and I don't really know how to exactly define what spirituality would be, and I don't think it's important to preach a particular branch of a religion. It's more just sort of what I'm talking about, where the earliest religion began from a sense of humans first became conscious. We can maybe trace that to 30,000 years ago. The earliest cave paintings that show symbolic language. And we trace perhaps the beginning of verbal language, not just pictorial, 30, 40,000 years ago. Maybe older. We'll find out because we keep finding things older. But that first spark of consciousness is a very strange moment in our history, right? Imagine that. I mean, it's not going to be like a moment. It happened over time. But those first people that are becoming conscious, they're now becoming conscious that they're going to die. They become conscious of their mortality. And they're looking around them and they see nature and they see floods and they see storms and there's earthquakes and these insanely large wild animals. And they feel so small in comparison to it. So incredibly small that they're filled with a sense of terror, but also of awe about all of these things going around them. That is the origin of religion and spirituality. The awareness of how small we are in the cosmos, right? I don't care what Elon Musk does. He's never going to get rid of the fact that each individual human is an incredibly small, a grain of sand in an immense ocean, or whatever metaphor there is. No technology will get rid of that. So if humans return to that awareness of the cosmic, of eternity, of infinite space, of the Big Bang Theory, of the fact that our sun will eventually die and all of life will disappear, but life appeared on Earth, that is a spiritual moment. That's an awareness. That's an expansion of consciousness. That is what my book is about. It's not allied with Buddhism or Islam or Christianity or pagan religion. It's just about expanding your consciousness. And I think that's what needs to happen. And I predict it will happen.
I'm curious now to hear a little bit about your experience, the stroke you had, and kind of what that taught you about consciousness and your own relationship with death.
Well, death is something that is inside of your body. You don't think of it that way. Our culture is now one of our main problems is our denial of death as an experience. It's become an idea. It's not something in your body anymore. In the past, you would see people dying around you on the streets. You would see your father or your mother die in the house, right? When animals were killed for your food, you would see that rabbit being slaughtered, killed. You saw the blood. You knew that life and death was this feeling in your gut, right? It's a virtuality now for us. It's like cartoon images on a screen where someone's shooting 100 people. We don't feel it. It's an idea, okay? I thought about death a lot, but it was an idea because I live in this culture. It wasn't something so real to me. Now, I do maintain that when you fall asleep, in certain moments, you have a slight intimation of death. But I was, 6 years ago, I was driving my car. My girlfriend, my wife now, was in the passenger seat. And she saw that side of my face was just going some weird contortion. She got very frightened. She said, pull over. I was driving. She said, pull over. I said, no, I'm fine. She forced me to pull over. And then I started I'm not even aware of it because she told me about it. I started getting out of the car. She pulled me back in. She called 911 and then I'm out. I'm unconscious. I'm in a coma. And I had a stroke. I had a blood clot in my neck, right here. So blood wasn't flowing to my brain. And if that goes on for a couple of minutes, you're dead. And if that goes, because your brain controls everything in your body, right? All systems shut down, you die. Or it goes on for a little shorter and you have massive brain damage and you're like a vegetable. I was very fortunate that she called it, that everything happened just in the nick of time. The paramedics came, they relieved the blood clot, they got me to a hospital. I'm unconscious, but I had images in my mind as I felt like life was being sucked out of me, right? I felt like this weird thing that we call life was like a physical thing, a reality that's sucking out of my bones, it's sucking out of my body, it's disappearing. It's like the last image I have in my mind of literally my bones softening and all that energy in life just vanishing. Okay, I wake up and I'm in the bottom of a gurney. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know where I am. I have no idea. And I'm screaming. I'm screaming in Spanish. That's how out of it I was. I'm yelling, suéltame, suéltame. Let me go, let me go. And then I remember as I'm sitting in the gurney, I think when I woke up, but I'm not sure because I could be misremembering things. A lot of times when you have these experiences, what you later remember isn't really what happened. But I had this image of I'm dead and I'm looking at kind of like my funeral or something. My mother and Anna, my girlfriend, my wife, is there and they're talking and I'm looking down on them and I have this feeling, well, everything's okay. Life goes on. It's okay. Everything's okay. And that's it. And then, I'm transported back up and I go through hell because I have nothing, my left side of my body. I mean, not hell. I'm just shocked and startled by what happened to me. But since then, having a reprieve and being alive, nothing quite looks the same. Yeah, I have moments where I get sucked back into daily life and I lose that sense of I was reborn, literally, back from the dead. But every now and then, I'll be looking out the window and I'll be seeing a bird in the sky, or I'll see the squirrels squirming around and go, wow, man, I'm alive. Wow, look at that. The sky's there. At some point, it's all going to disappear. It's going to be like that dream I had where whoosh, and then suddenly everything goes black and you're dead and that's it, right? But no, I'm alive, right? Wow. And so it's stuck with me. And that feeling of my bones softening and life sucking out, it still sticks with me. I still have that feeling. So to answer your question, for most people, death is something up here, but for me, it's something right in here. It changed that. So I feel it.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit to kind of modern times we're in. We just went through an election. People are stressed and the times are intense. I want to hear what your thoughts on modern leaders today, kind of the role that, I don't know, technologists like Elon Musk play in government going forward. Any sort of thoughts you have on any of that?
Well, I don't know. Every time I think that I predict the future, I'm woefully wrong. So I've learned that I'm not Nostradamus, and I become humble, and I realize that when I see people, even the greatest intellects and academics, predict what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years, I go, oh, come on, you're an idiot. You don't really know. If I could go back and look at everybody's prediction 10 years ago, the world would be full of fools, people we think are smart. They're not smart at all because they think they know what's going to happen and they don't. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know we're living through a very, very strange moment in time where the old paradigms are falling apart. And we have to recognize this. And if you take a larger view of it and you get out of the day-to-day, who won this election, who's going to be in the cabinet, et cetera, and you look from a higher-up perspective, people are feeling now a sense of powerlessness. It's something that goes back to my first book, The 48 Laws of Power, in which I said that the most unbearable feeling for a human being is to feel powerless. And I'm not criticizing it because I understand where it comes from. I have a good living. I make a fair amount of money. I don't have to worry about things, which I did for much of my life. But I can appreciate how other people don't have that. And what also really made me appreciate it was my stroke. Suddenly feeling like I have no control over my body made me really understand people who have no control over their lives and their destiny. Feeling dependent and weak is a very upsetting emotion. And I'm not criticizing it because I understand where it comes from. I have a good living. I make a fair amount of money. I don't have to worry about things, which I did for much of my life. But I can appreciate how other people don't have that. And what also really made me appreciate it was my stroke. Suddenly feeling like I have no control over my body made me really understand people who have no control over their lives and their destiny. Feeling dependent and weak is a very upsetting emotion, physically and psychologically. So people are feeling powerless right now. They don't know if they can buy the things that they need to buy. The healthcare in this country is abominable, right? And there's so much about our daily life that is kind of unpleasant. And so people were angry, and rightfully so. You know, our government, this moment in time, requires massive reform. Now, I'm not saying, and I'm not a Trump person at all. I voted the other way, and I've always been on the other side of the spectrum. But I understand the anger. I understand the feeling of powerlessness. I understand the need for something else, for our system to radically reform and to become a true democracy, which it isn't right now. And so it's a moment that's very confusing. It's kind of like several tides are going against each other, and it's kind of creating one of those whirls which you can drown in. But we don't really know what's going on. And because of that, the tendency will be to latch onto easy solutions. You know, when it comes to figures like Elon Musk, you know, he's obviously a very brilliant person when it comes to certain aspects of technology. You know, and he gets things done, which is, in our country, a rare thing. But just because you're good at that doesn't mean you're good at something else, which is a myth that I've written about before. Just because you're good at business doesn't mean you're good at fixing government. Just because you're good at building a rocket or a car doesn't mean you're good at this other endeavor, right? But you get this kind of messianic belief in yourself. Oh God, I'm so strong. I've got so much money. I've so much success here that I can do anything, right? So there's hubris involved in that. So I don't deny that there's something there, that he's very powerful and very smart in something. But I think to go back to my classics training, there's something hubristic about it, which is going to end up leading to some kind of tragedy or failure, because that's what happens when humans get hubris.
I'm curious, this is something I've thought about a lot as I have read your work and read your interviews. Do you believe that constantly thinking about human nature and the kind of the dark side, the weaknesses, the powerlessness, does that constant studying of human nature and reading about it and thinking about it make you and anyone else that does it kind of a darker person? Do you think it makes you less happy in life?
I'm a dark person. Do I look like a dark person?
I don't think so, but I want to hear it from you.
No, I've never been a dark person. What happened to me was I was always very innocent and naive. I was the opposite. I was kind of a romantic. And then I got in the work world, particularly Hollywood, and I go, wow, this is an ugly world. People are so political. They're so manipulative. They're so narcissistic. This is what I expected. And it made me angry that nobody talks about this, that everybody pretends that we're in the late 20th century, which is when this was, and we're all so wonderful and great, and we're all trying to do the best. No. Humans have a dark streak in them. We have an irrational streak in us. It goes back thousands of years, and I don't care how much technology we have, we're not changing human nature. So what my books have made me do in all this thinking is, it hasn't made me cynical or dark. It's just made me realistic. So I still have my naive self in me. And when I'm writing my new book, you'll see more of that. But it made me realize that there's a dark streak in our nature. And I think I've always known that, even since I was a kid. And it's actually a liberating thing, Milan. It's not an ugly thing at all. Because what happens is, in my own experience day to day, I'll catch myself going, God damn it, Robert, you just had that thought. That is so ugly and narcissistic of you to think like that way. Robert, that's almost pathological, what you just thought. And I go, whoa, that's true. So I'm aware of it, and being aware of it is actually what makes you change your behavior. So I don't want to be thinking like that. I can't help those thoughts happening on me, but I'm not going to act on it, and I'm going to feel a sense of shame. But what happens with people now, or throughout history, is they're not aware of their dark thoughts. They're not aware of their ugly desires, of the moments where they've been manipulative or mean to other people. They justify it with something else. So to actually be aware of your own dark side is the only way to convert it into something else. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It leads me to a question of thinking and being curious about your perception on therapy and that the ability of therapy to give people awareness. Do you see that as valuable, or would you just say, go read your books to gain that awareness?
No, I would never say go read my books. That would be very narcissistic of me. Talking therapy certainly has value for some people. I think it has more value than constantly medicating yourself, although I understand for some extreme mental problems, the medication is very valuable and very important, so I'm not. But the thing is, sometimes you can't talk your way out of your mental disorder. And what it is you're too much in your head, and talking about it and going to therapy is just only accentuating that. So the reason I say that is I've been doing heavy Zen meditation for 14 years now. And I read a lot of books on it, although I shouldn't do that because reading books on it is very detrimental to your practice. But the idea is that what makes people miserable, unhappy, what makes people depressed is living in this kind of constructed world reality of ideas, of in your head, of language, of words, and you're disconnected from your environment, right? And so you need to get out of that mode and just sort of experience life immediately, directly. And so the more you talk, so sometimes when I'm meditating, I have this thing, it's hard to explain, I'll try, where I'm very much focused on the sounds, on the white wall that I'm looking at the moment. I'm trying to be in the moment. And I'll feel for a second, a split second, my mind slowly withdrawing from that. And in that moment I go, aha, I'm about to have a thought. And then suddenly, if I'm not careful, I get trapped in that thought, and for a minute or two I'm thinking about it and I'm not meditating. And I've got to go out back into that wall and into those sounds. So the thinking is just like drawing you into this internal world, okay? So the best therapy that you can have is to get out of that. If you could do that in talking therapy, great. If you can do that with hallucinogenics, great. If you can do that through meditation, through walking, through doing something, that's the best therapy in the world for me, is to get out of that moment and go like that.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear, and I promise we're slowly wrapping up, but I'm curious, there's a term that I really like, which is moonshots, the moments in time where...
What is it?
Moonshots.
Oh, moonshots.
Moments in time where we witness great advances, either from technology or progress, expansion of consciousness for people. Are there moments that you can look at throughout your life where you could say that you feel like humanity as a whole experienced some expansions of consciousness that kind of give you hope or optimism for the future?
Well, you mean sort of as a collective, as a public, not just as an individual?
Yeah, so one example would be when we put the first man on the moon, and all of a sudden...
That was an amazing moment. You were probably not born yet, obviously. I was about 9-10 years old. I was totally blown away, and I've ever since been obsessed with that.
Yeah.
So that was definitely, what was great about that was it was a collective moment where everybody around the whole world was glued to their TV, and it was like an amazing moment, not just for the feat of putting a person there, but just from the sense of there's somebody on that planet and they're looking at planet Earth from the moon. It was one of those consciousness expanding moments. So yeah, I felt it then, and that evolved around technology. So not all technology was bad. And as somebody who grew up on a lot of science fiction, the idea of traveling to other planets and expanding that is something that I wish I'd be alive for, because it would be It'll be an amazing, amazing moment when it happens if we don't kill ourselves before then. So that aspect of technology absolutely fascinates me.
Where would you toss that up? The likelihood of us killing ourselves, or not being able to get off this planet before the sun explodes?
On the one hand, I read an article the other day about fission energy, and which is basically reproducing what the sun does, constantly renewing its source of energy, because scientists thought the sun must be dying, but no, it is dying, but it's constantly going through this process of renewing its power, its force. And so that's what fission energy would be. And if we could create it, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, so please, scientists out there, don't yell at me. But the idea is we're going to reproduce that, and it's going to be a kind of fuel and energy that's renewable, that has no bad effects. And they're claiming that in 10 years, they're getting closer to it. That kind of moonshot would be transformative, because we could save our planet literally from global warming, right? But it may not happen, and things may reach a point where it's so bad and climate change gets so aggressive that we reach a point of no return. The other thing that troubles me very deeply, something that doesn't get discussed much, I'm an animal lover, but the continual extinction of species is not just some cuddly thing, we need these little animals. Our lives depend on it. So when the bees disappear, the whole, scale of life will disappear with it. Everything is interconnected, right? Insects play an incredibly important role in churning up the soil, etc. So when you start decimating one aspect of the ladder of life, it has these cascading effects. And also, our research on animals has led to some of our greatest medical breakthroughs, and we're losing that. So, of course, life renews itself, and if we do have this moonshot, and it happens, things will recycle, there'll be new species that will evolve, and the planet will repopulate itself. Man, that would be fantastic, and I hope I'm around to see some of that. But that would be a transformative moment.
I'd love your perspective on this. I recently visited a laboratory that they've been funded with the sole purpose of trying to create unicorns, like horses with horns. And they're taking DNA from rhinos, and they're making that DNA, be able to translate to a horse. And while I was there, I saw a lizard that is glowing, glow in the dark, that they took from the DNA from a jellyfish, and they made that. And they had this greater vision that eventually we'll be able to solve pretty much all human illnesses, be able to double life expectancy. You can make humans that have gills, they can breathe underwater.
Okay, that would be great. That would be great. And if they could make us fly, that would be even better. But, there's a thing called unintended consequences. And I can't remember the exact story, but it was like in India, in the British Empire, and there were all these cobras in New Delhi, and the English decided to go around and capture all the cobras and get rid of them. And they were kind of a sacred animal, because they thought it was very dangerous. And what ended up happening first, the cobras actually served some kind of function. But then the Indian people were so upset about losing their beloved cobras that they started hoarding them and not reporting them. And eventually there were more cobras than ever being bred in homes, etc. And then the city was more infested than it ever was. I'm doing not justice to the story. But the idea is sometimes you do something that has unintended consequences, because that's what it means to be a human being and to have limited rationality. We can't see the consequences of our action. So you start expanding people's life expectancy, and the planet becomes so crowded with people living into the 120, 150, that we create another whole problem. We can't feed ourselves. We can't. You say science will solve that and we'll go to another planet. Yeah, but we create more and more problems. Every time we have some great new invention, it creates more and more problems. So maybe it would be good to solve everything. Maybe life expectancy, maybe don't mess with that. Death has a point, has a purpose in our lives. There's a purpose why things are born and then die. And
you think that matters forever? The need to die, the relevance of that?
yeah, I don't. The idea that we're going to get rid of death is not only silly, unrealistic, and impossible. It also reveals a kind of sickness. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not offending you.
It's kind of like I'm here for your opinion.
It's like
perspective.
It's like an inability to grow up and face reality. You know, everything. If I added up, and I'm trying to do that in the Sublime book, all of the living creatures from the very first single cell to now who have lived and died, you know, you try to calculate that, it would be beyond trillions. I don't know what's above trillion, right? That is the cycle of life. Everything is born and everything dies. And if you cut that off, things don't live forever. You're messing with a very important natural reality, right? Something terrible will happen with that. And so no, you have to come to terms with the fact that you're a mortal creature, that you're going to die. And yeah, maybe it would be good. You know, my mother just turned 98 the other day, and I would like to live till I'm her age. That would be pretty good if I have my capacities with me. But what matters more than quantity of life and years is quality of life. So I don't care if people are living to 200. If they're still like getting into that contracting consciousness, it's getting worse and worse, you could live forever and it's going to be miserable. But if you live until you're 50, but you're alive, you're awake, you're aware, that's what matters more, because at some point you're going to die anyway. Yeah. And in 10 million years, no one will remember who you are. The whole planet will be different. Your body, everything will have disintegrated, is gone. What matters if you lived an extra 100 years? What matters was that you were aware, you were awake, you were conscious, you were aware of the insanity of being alive in this moment. That's more important than the years that add up.
Can you see that in other people? Can you look at someone and really in your first interactions with them know that whether they're that aware, awake person or not?
Well, yeah, I think so. You know, as I said, I'm very understanding of people who don't have that. So I don't want to feel like I'm part of some Ubermensch club, Superman club. So I understand the forces that make people kind of contract. But yes, I do encounter people who have that feel about them. And can I recognize that from their nonverbals? I don't know. I'd have to think about it. It's possible. Yeah. There is something about them, their whole manner. Maybe I could recognize that. I do know this, that I'll find it more often in other cultures. Like sometimes when I go to Mexico, I'll see more people that I feel like have a bit of that, a touch of that, right? Cultures that are not so technologically obsessed. But I don't know. I don't know if I have met people like that, and they're people you want to keep around you.
Yeah. Do you view American culture, capitalistic culture, as a detriment at all to society? Do you see it as it needing some sort of adjustment so that people are able to enjoy their lives more? How do you perceive kind of the...
Well, yeah, I mean, it has... You know, obviously, we live in this culture. It raised me. It gave me a good standard of living. I can't knock it, and I wouldn't have been very happy growing up in Eastern Europe or Soviet Union. But there reaches a point where the quality of life is deteriorating in some ways. So, to give you an example, I was just reading in the newspaper today about a new book by a sociologist called The Last Human Job. And she studied like nurses and people working in hospitals, and how they naturally are like going around people who are dying with terrible illnesses, and they're comforting them and they're talking to them, and they've learned of doing this so long the best way to do it. But now this is the element of capitalism coming in. No, That's too much wasting time. You need to put this all into your computer. We need data. We can't just have you going around helping people feel better about their life and their mortality. We need data. You got to go, after each interaction, you got to go to a computer and you got to type it in. And the people were reporting to her that it was messing with their ability to function like the way that they're normally able to function. So this aspect of capitalism, where everything has to be quantified, where everything has to be turned into data, where every human job has to fit into big data in some way, I think is hurting us in a very elemental way. And so, like the inability to interact with a human being, where everything's on the phone, where everything is online, where now you buy tickets, you get on an airplane, it's all done on your computer. Now, sometimes dealing with somebody at an airline counter isn't a great experience, I understand. Or actually having to call somebody at the hospital and make an appointment wasn't some soul-enriching experience. But dealing with humans does kind of make you kind of humble. It makes you aware. It makes you patient about having to deal with them. It makes you understand other people and their problems. And cutting all that out because of making a profit has a dangerous point. And the last thing I'll say on that is, I served on the board of directors of a publicly traded company, American Apparel. And I'm not a business person. I have no business background. My background's literature and books. And so it was a very interesting experience. And I saw that business is so geared towards the quarterly report, particularly if you're a publicly traded company, especially if you're a publicly traded company, that you have no way of thinking in terms of 5 years or 10 years about your company. You're thinking about 3 months. You've got to generate this. You've got to generate productivity. You've got to make more things. Without thinking about the quality, without thinking about the brand and where it's going. I read the business section every day in the New York Times, and I see more and more signs of how that's hurting us in some way. So the system, it educated me. It made for the life that I lead now. I can't knock it, but it needs some reforming. It needs some fixing.
Do you feel, though, that profitable work is an important part of life? Like, let's move to an idealistic world where there's an amount of abundance and some sort of what we would call socialism, where people have great access to money and it's allowing them to take care of their basic needs. In that world, do you think that people should basically spend their time writing, focused on art, kind of like living in that, I don't know, I want to say almost liberal arts type of version of work?
No, because...
or artist.
Part of what develops the human spirit is adversity and resistance. So I think it was Schopenhauer who had a quote, if roasted turkeys could just fall out of the sky and we never had to do anything, we would become the most miserable species on the planet. We would wither up and all die. And the idea is that having resistance, having problems, having adversity, having things not go your way, strengthens you, toughens you up, makes you understand what you value, what you want. When everything goes your way and it's just a smooth path, you don't have to worry about making a living, money is just coming to you, I just think you're going to shrivel up, you're going to become like those Roman emperors. You're going to be like Nero and Caligula. We're going to have 12 million Caligulas walking around, right? The human being needs adversity. We need trouble. We need difficulties to overcome, to kind of develop a soul, to develop a spirit. I know I wouldn't personally be able to write the books that I write if I hadn't spent 20 years wandering in the wilderness, being so miserable and depressed and unable to get what I wanted. It strengthened me in an elemental way. So I would worry about your ideal world because I think we need to be tough, and we need resistance from the world around us to toughen us up.
And do you think those long periods of depression or so that I think most people experience, would you say that those are important and they're necessary almost to a full
They can have
life?
great value, and they can also destroy you. I talk in my book Mastery about about this, in that knowing that I wanted to be a writer and having in the very back of my mind faith that I could do it someday kept me going through all those years of depression. But a lot of people don't have that. They don't have what I call their connection to their life's task, to their calling, their vocation. And so when you go through 15 years of that and you're treading water and you're not getting ahead, and you're getting depressed, you just sink and you keep sinking and you don't know how to get back up. You don't have that faith that I had in the back of my head. So it's important, and that's why I wrote Mastery, for you to connect to that so you don't have that sinking feeling. So that kind of depression and adversity can have a very positive effect if you have that bit of floor underneath you. If you know and you believe in yourself and you know this is what you were meant to accomplish in life, you'll somehow find your way back. So it depends on the individual, because depression can crush you, it can kill you, but it can also have a positive effect, as it eventually did on me, although I was lucky to fall into the books that I write, and if I hadn't, maybe I wouldn't be here talking to you right now.
That's powerful. What advice would you give, I guess, to people navigating a modern life, trying to pursue mastery, trying to appreciate moments of sublime in their lives, like in the pursuit of that balance? What advice would you give to young people?
Well, you gotta kind of scale it down to values. Like, what is the primary value? You got to keep it simple. You can't be having 20 different things going on in your mind. So the most important, the most essential thing is what I talked about, is figuring out why you were born, your life's task, which is a sublime thing, and I do have a chapter on that. There is what I call the daemon. There is something inside of you that is speaking to you constantly and telling you what you were destined for. And I talk in Mastery, I give very explicit instructions about how to find that life's task, how to connect to that voice. So if you're 19, you're 20, you're 21, doing that is the most important thing you can do. And the reason I say that is, now when you're in your 20s and you know that I'm definitely heading towards a career in engineering, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a filmmaker, a musician. Okay, you've got like a direction, okay? And in your 20s, I say, have some fun, have some adventure. Don't like immediately grab for that Goldman Sachs job that's going to pay you 6 figures right away. That's going to kill your soul. Experiment, travel, have some fun, try different things within that field that you're wanting to pursue, right? And mix it up a little bit. So you want to study engineering, all right? You studied it in college, but then you go do something a little bit different, like having to do with the arts, and maybe then you'll combine the two. So you're searching, you're learning. You must keep learning, because learning is the greatest. The desire to keep learning is so important, okay? And so then by the time you're 30, it'll come to you. Or for me, it was 39, but hopefully earlier for you. This is what I meant to do. Now I can create the business that I wanted. Now I can invent that thing in engineering. Now I can create that film or whatever. And then you go into it, and the world opens up to you. And now you're not having to spend every minute of your life worrying about money, which is what will make encountering the sublime very difficult for you. Even though I'm trying to maintain in the book that no matter how poor you are, you can have these sublime experiences, but it's harder. So if you can figure out your life's task when you're young, if you can allow yourself some looseness and explore and have some fun with it, and then you can get your act together and start building something, then your life will become kind of sublime in a way, and you'll be able to have more of these experiences. So boil it down to the essentials. Don't go wander through life lost. Don't wander through your 20s not having any idea of what you want in life. Figure it out as early as you can without making it a single monorail, a single point, I want this job. You have a wider view of it, but you have some direction. That's what I would advise.
That's helpful. And for those who are older, who can maybe sense a little bit that their worldview is starting to become more narrow, more rigid, do you have any wisdom to kind of shed on what they can do to kind of help reverse that or to help maintain that love of learning?
Yeah, I can give very simple advice. Read the Sublime book when it comes out, which will be in about a little under 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, it'll be like that. Yeah, because it's 2026, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Because I give in there ideas. Every chapter is how you can access this, right? The last part of the book are exercises, literally, and how to make this experience part of your daily life. So how you look at things when you take a walk, how you look at the world, how you see things differently, how you have an altered perspective. I think it was Marcel Proust who had a quote that the greatest experience in life, the greatest travel you could have, would be to see the world with a different pair of eyes. Mm. So I'm giving you a different pair of eyes of how to see the world around you, and exercises. And go back to your childhood when you had these experiences and try and recall them. Because in recalling them, you can relive them. And in reliving them, you can call up a little bit of that sublime. And when you call up a little bit of it, it has this kind of yeast-like effect where it starts growing and growing and growing inside of you. So being connected to your childhood in some way and recalling those moments of awe that you felt, and even of terror, will kind of give a little thing of light that can now enter your brain and go, wow, that's what the sublime is.
Okay, I promise my last 2 questions. Does your book talk about psychedelics at all? And you mentioned microdosing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't really mention it because I don't want to make people feel like they have to depend on anything. I do mention it a little bit. I'd mention it in context of stories that I tell. And I say that, in passing I'll mention it, but I don't want to emphasize it because I want it to be something that is part of you already. It's in you. And you don't need anything else to access it. Mm. You don't need technology, certainly don't need technology, and you don't even need hallucinogens. And I want to make it clear because some people are afraid of it, some people can't afford it, some people don't have access to it. So I want it to be, see, when I originally had the idea for the Sublime book before my stroke, I was going to fly to Tierra del Fuego and see where Magellan crossed, go to Antarctica. And I was going to go to the Gobi Desert and walk and have sublime experiences and write about that. And then my stroke happened, and I could barely walk out the front door of my house, so no Gobi Desert for me. But the book is better because of that, because I'm trying to say, you can have as crappy a body as I have right now, sort of stuck in my room, and I'm having sublime experiences all the time. Here's how to do it, right? So you don't need a crutch. You don't need something to give it to you. It's all around you, right? So the way I describe it is the world is sublime naturally. It's calling to you. You're just not hearing it. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to open your ears so you can hear it. Now, as far as the microdosing is concerned, I've always been intrigued by the idea of it, and then somebody gave me some ground up magic mushrooms that I kind of microdosed myself. I kind of eyeballed, so I'm not very scientific about it, and I put it in my tea. And the way I describe it is, because I'm writing right now, and the kind of book I'm writing, I need to be kind of focused and in the moment and creative. Is normally our minds kind of go like that. Sorry, my left arm's not going straight, but normally our minds are like that, and that makes it uncreative and rigid. And the microdosing puts me off the track. Instead of going, I'm kind of going, and it's just slight, because I'm not tripping. But that slight going off the track, wow, interesting ideas are coming to me. I can think about it differently. So that's how I kind of use it. I'm using it for my work right now, and maybe eventually I would use it just for my own mental health. But I find it kind of breaks up that rigid monorail way of thinking this is the only way, and it puts me off the tracks. Sometimes it can be scary and I can fall off, but usually kind of leads to some new destination. Because the thing about these kind of microdosing, whichever one you choose, is that it can have a slight downside. It makes you more sensitive. Normally, we have these kind of buffers in our character that prevent us from thinking about certain things that are unpleasant. And the good thing about the microdosing is it opens you up and makes you more sensitive to things. But it can also make you more sensitive to bad things. So I notice sometimes, maybe 20% of the time, something that irritates me even more. And I can't get out of that. But normally, it's kind of a good way of getting off that track.
Yeah. Okay, my last question, and for those who are big fans of both yours and Ryan Holiday, I'm curious how you perceive differences almost in your view of the world or philosophies between yourself and Ryan a little bit.
Well, I love Ryan dearly. He was my mentee, and we're still very good friends, and he's a great writer, and I don't have any children, so he's sort of the equivalent of a son. I'm very proud of what he's achieved. If we could say if somebody had never outshined the master, he's in the process of outshining the master. The only difference, I would say, is that, and it could change because he's so young. I mean, he's still younger than when I was when I wrote my first book. He's already written like 12 of them or whatever. I'm always wandering. So I wrote the 48 Laws of Power. I didn't want to write the 48 Laws of Power Part 2, so I wrote Seduction, which is kind of a different book. And then I went into Warfare and Strategy, which is kind of not the same as Seduction. I mean, they're related, but they're different. And then I do the 50 Cent book, which is totally strange. And I do Mastery, which has nothing to do with any of the other books. Then Human Nature, which kind of is a summation of the other ones, but also different. And now I'm going on it. So I like always different angles to approach things from. Ryan is very much in the Stoicism mold. And, he'll probably break out of it at some point. And he has. He wrote a book called Conspiracy about the movement to destroy Gawker. And he wrote Trust Me, I'm Lying. So that's not totally true, but he's pretty much in that Stoic frame of mind, which is a beautiful frame of mind, a beautiful philosophy. I don't know what it is, but I get very restless when I'm in one mode, because I have to spend now, it wasn't that case earlier, I have to spend 4 or 5 years with a book. And if it's just like the last book, I can't wake up in the morning. I need something new and different, which the Sublime book is, for me at least.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference. But on our overall philosophy of life, how we look at things, we're very much aligned. I don't know if I don't think he's into, expanded consciousness with hallucinogens or anything like that. There is an aspect of Marcus Aurelius that has that in it, and we've talked about it. But
Marcus Aurelius did hallucinogens?
No. But I didn't mean to imply that. What I meant was, he might have, we don't know. But I don't think the Romans they probably had access. I don't know what they would be taking. But
opium, maybe.
Well, the Greeks were doing opium, poppies. No, but he has this thing in meditations where he says he wants you to think of things as they actually are. So you're drinking your wine. He wants you to actually think of the grapes being crushed that went into the making of them. He wants you to think of, and that's kind of a sublime way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I talk a lot about it in the book. So there are avenues where we align. And Ryan got the first 2 chapters of my book when I was first writing them, and he loved them. So I think we are aligned in that way. It's just he's much younger, and he's got a pretty subtle way of doing things, and he'll change. But I'm more restless than he is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're
This
very
was
welcome.
incredible.
You're very welcome.
You.